The sun was barely rising when she stepped onto the old wooden porch. The morning air was cool, calm, and quiet, until she broke it with a single question. Her voice was soft, but it carried a kind of urgency that made the rancher pause halfway through tightening his saddle strap. "Can you take us to town?" she asked. The rancher looked up slowly, studying her face. She rarely asked for anything, and when she did, it was never with that tone. There was something different today, something unsettled. Behind her, the door creaked, and for a moment he wondered if someone else was inside, waiting, needing help. But she didn't offer any explanation. She just stood there with her hands clasped tightly, as if holding herself together. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he wiped the dust off his gloves and walked closer, trying to read the situation in her eyes. The early light brushed across her face, revealing a hint of worry, maybe even fear. Out here on the ranch, miles away from the nearest town, people usually avoided unnecessary trips, with good reason. The road was long, rough, and unpredictable. A simple ride could turn into a long day, even a long night. She knew that, and he knew she knew it. Still, she asked. He took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough that she shifted on her feet. Not because she was impatient, but because she wasn't sure what answer she'd get. She was used to him thinking things through. The rancher wasn't a man who acted hastily. But today, he wasn't just thinking about the road or the weather. He was thinking about her reason, whatever it was, and the unspoken weight behind it. Finally, he nodded, but not in a casual, easy way. This nod came with something deeper. He stepped closer, lowered his voice slightly, and said the words that made her inhale sharply. "Only if you promise to come back home." Her eyes widened just a little, as if she hadn't expected a condition. The wind moved softly between them, carrying the smell of hay and worn leather. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a brief moment neither of them said another word. The promise hung in the air, heavier than the question that started it all. And in that quiet, something between them began to shift. Life on the ranch didn't move fast. It moved in steady rhythms, sunrise chores, long stretches of quiet, and evenings that drifted into calm darkness without much warning. The rancher had lived this way for years, maybe longer than he liked to admit. Out here, miles from the nearest paved road, he didn't have neighbors stopping by. No traffic passed through. The ranch was a world of its own, held together by hard work, routine, and the kind of silence most people never truly experience. He woke before the sun because the animals depended on him. The horses knew the sound of his boots on the dirt. The cattle recognized the familiar clank of his feed buckets. Even the wind seemed used to him, brushing past in gentle waves like a greeting. Nothing about ranch life was easy, but it was honest. And in that honesty, he found peace. Days weren't glamorous, but they were predictable, and predictability was something he valued more than he ever said out loud. She, on the other hand, wasn't born into this kind of life. When she'd first arrived at the ranch months ago, or maybe longer, it was clear she carried a different kind of story on her shoulders. She didn't talk about her past much. She didn't need to, her eyes told enough. She had seen things, lost things, maybe ran from things. The ranch offered her something she desperately needed, a safe place to breathe. And he never turned away someone who needed a shelter, even if he didn't show it with warm smiles or gentle words. He simply made space for her, the way the land made space for the morning sun. At first she struggled with the silence. The wide-open fields made her feel exposed. The nights were too dark, too quiet, but slowly the ranch helped her settle. She learned to move with the routine, helping where she could, feeding chickens, bringing water to the garden, cleaning tools. She found comfort in small tasks, comfort in purposeful work. She even started waking up early just to see the sunrise spread across the land in soft orange light. Something about that view reminded her that the world didn't always have to be loud to make sense. The rancher noticed the change in her, though he didn't mention it. He wasn't a man who pointed out emotions, but he had a way of seeing them. He saw how her shoulders gradually relaxed, how she stopped jumping at every noise, how she started humming quietly when she swept the porch. She was healing here, and maybe he liked knowing that his land had something to do with it. Still, there were limits to what the ranch could provide. Supplies ran low, medicines needed refilling, tools needed replacing. And she had reasons of her own for wanting to go to town, reasons she hadn't spoken yet, reasons she kept buried deep like something fragile she was afraid to expose. She didn't press him often. She didn't make demands. She respected the ranch, respected the land, respected him. That was why her question earlier hit differently. It wasn't casual. It wasn't simple. It meant something was stirring inside her, something she couldn't ignore anymore. The ranch itself told part of the story. It was an old place, though not broken. Weathered fences leaned slightly, as if listening to the wind. The barn carried the scent of hay and worn leather, familiar and grounding. The field stretched out so far that the horizon looked like it swallowed everything in sight. Living out here required strength, patience, and independence. She had learned a bit of that, but he knew the town held temptations the ranch couldn't compete with: noise, people, opportunities, distractions. It was natural to wonder if she might want those things again. The rancher had grown used to her presence. He didn't say it, but he had. He'd grown used to seeing her on the porch in the mornings, tying her hair back before feeding the hens. He'd grown used to the soft sound of her footsteps or the quiet way she'd sit nearby while he repaired a saddle. She didn't interrupt his routine. She blended into it, as if she had always belonged there. And sometimes, when he caught her laughing softly at something small, a chicken chasing another, or a stubborn goat refusing to move, he felt a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Home, for him, was more than land. It was everything that happened on that land, and lately she had become part of that everything. But he wasn't blind to the truth. He knew the ranch could feel too small for someone who once lived a different life. He had seen people come and go over the years. Some left because they wanted more. Some left because they needed something else. Some left because quiet wasn't enough to drown out whatever pulled them away. Maybe that was why he asked for the promise earlier, not to trap her, not to claim her, but because he had learned the hard way that once someone left for town, there was always a chance they wouldn't return. Town meant choices. Town meant new paths. Town meant reminders of the world beyond the ranch's borders. She had brought a tender kind of energy into his quiet existence. Something like companionship, though neither of them had labeled it. He wasn't sure what it was exactly, but he knew he didn't want to lose it, not suddenly, not without warning. So when she asked him to take her to town, he didn't just hear the question. He heard everything she might be hiding beneath it. The ranch was her safe place, but town was unknown territory. And unknown territory had a way of changing people. He'd seen it before. She stayed on the outskirts of his world, yet at the center of it too. And that balance was delicate. Too delicate to pretend it didn't matter when she asked to leave, even temporarily. He needed assurance, a promise, something to steady the fear he tried to hide beneath his calm, measured silence. She didn't understand all of that yet, but she felt something shift when he asked for her word. The ranch wasn't just a place anymore. It had started to mean something to her as well, and his request made her realize just how much her answer might change what came next. She stood there longer than she meant to, her hands still pressed together as if they were holding a secret she wasn't ready to share. His words, asterisk only if you promise to come back home, asterisk, echoed in her mind with a weight she didn't expect. A simple trip to town shouldn't have felt this heavy. A simple request shouldn't have felt like a turning point. Yet here they were, standing on the porch as though the next breath might change everything. He didn't look away. The rancher wasn't a man who used many words, but he had a presence that filled the space between them more than any speech could. His eyes held steady on her, not demanding, not accusing, but searching, quietly asking her to understand why that promise mattered. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about holding her back. It was something else, something he didn't know how to say out loud. She inhaled slowly, trying to read him the way he always seemed to read her. There was a calmness in his stance, but beneath that calm lay a hesitation she hadn't seen before. He wasn't scared of the journey. He wasn't scared of the road. He was scared of the possibility that she might not want to return once she reached the town's busy streets. She had seen that fear before, in people who had been left behind, and she could feel it now, wrapped gently inside his simple request. The question she asked had been straightforward, but the promise he asked for was anything but. She dropped her gaze for a moment, a soft sigh escaping her lips. The wooden boards of the porch creaked as she shifted her weight. She wasn't trying to avoid him. She was trying to find the right words inside herself. Her thoughts tangled together like threads she had never bothered to untie. She hadn't planned for this to happen, for the ranch to feel like a place she belonged, for him to become someone she trusted. And she definitely hadn't planned on a promise feeling as big as a choice about where her life was heading. When she finally raised her eyes, she found him watching her with that steady, patient look. He didn't interrupt her silence. He let her think. He always let her think. That was one of the first things she noticed about him when she arrived. He gave people room, even when he didn't fully understand what they were carrying. "I didn't mean to worry you," she whispered. He didn't respond at first. He simply waited, letting her continue in her own time. I needed to go," she said, her voice trembling just enough to reveal that the trip meant more than she had admitted. "There are things I have to take care of, things I can't ignore anymore." His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger but in concern. He took a step closer, lowering his voice in a way that made the moment feel even more intimate. "I'm not asking you to explain," he said quietly. "You don't owe me that." She swallowed hard. "Then why the promise?" He looked past her for a moment, out toward the open fields stretching endlessly into the distance. The horses grazed peacefully, unaware of the tension building on the porch. The wind brushed through the grass like a soft whisper, carrying the scent of earth and cedar. He seemed to take strength from that view before answering. "Because people who leave for town," he paused, searching for the right words, "sometimes they find something out there, something that makes them forget what they had here, or makes them think it wasn't enough." The honesty in his voice stunned her. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't desperate, it was simple, quiet truth. "And you think I'd forget?" she asked softly. He met her eyes again, his expression steady but vulnerable in a way she wasn't used to seeing. "I don't know. That's why I need the promise." Her breath caught, not because she felt trapped, but because she suddenly realized how deeply her presence mattered to him. He wasn't a man who needed much from the world, but he needed this. Her return, her word, her choosing the ranch even if just for now. She didn't want to hurt him, that much she knew. She didn't want him standing on this porch one morning, staring down an empty road, wondering why she didn't come back. She understood that kind of pain too well, the pain of waiting for someone who never returns. She'd lived it once, and she never wanted to be the person who caused it. Her chest tightened as she stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. She tilted her head up, searching his eyes with quiet determination. "If I say yes," she murmured, "it won't be a small promise." He nodded once. "I know. And you'll hold me to it." "I will," he answered. "But only because I want to know you'll be safe. And because," he hesitated, then finished softly, "because the ranch won't feel the same without you." The confession slipped out almost accidentally, but it hit her with startling clarity. She didn't smile, she didn't look away, she just let the truth settle inside her like a weight she was willing to carry. "All right," she whispered. "I promise, I'll come back home." The air shifted between them, subtle but powerful. Something unspoken passed through the silence, a mixture of relief, trust, and a connection neither of them fully understood yet. She didn't know what waited for her in town, but she knew this. His words had reached a part of her she thought she'd shut away long ago. And for the first time since she stepped onto his land, she realized that the ranch had become more than shelter. It had become a place she didn't want to lose. She didn't tell him that, not yet, but the promise she gave him held a truth she wasn't ready to speak out loud. They prepared to leave in a silence that felt heavier than it should have. He didn't rush, and she didn't speak. The rancher checked the truck like he always did. Quick look under the hood, firm tap on each tire, a slow wipe across the dusty windshield. Routine kept him calm. Routine kept his hands steady when his thoughts weren't. She stood by the porch steps watching him move. There was something comforting about the way he worked. He never hurried, never fumbled. Every motion had purpose. She knew he was giving her time, time to adjust to the promise she'd made, time to gather whatever strength she needed for the trip. He wasn't going to push her. He never had. When he finally waved her over, she took a deep breath and walked toward the truck. Her steps felt heavier than usual, like each one carried a question she hadn't answered yet. She climbed into the passenger seat, settling into the worn cushion that smelled faintly of leather and sunlight. He closed her door gently, almost as if he were afraid the sound might break something fragile between them. Then he rounded the front of the truck and got in on his side. The old engine rumbled awake, shaking off the dust that had settled overnight. The sound filled the quiet morning like a slow heartbeat. He adjusted his hat, glanced at her once, just long enough to check if she was ready, and then guided the truck down the dirt path leading away from the safety of the ranch. The road stretched out before them, long and uneven. The path wasn't smooth. It never was. Patches of cracked earth, dips where rain had carved small trenches, and scattered stones that made the truck bounce gently every few yards. But they both knew this road as well as they knew the lines on their own palms. It was the only way back to town, and it carried stories of those who had come and gone long before either of them stood on that porch. At first, neither spoke. The ranch passed behind them in a slow fade, the barn shrinking, the fence lines blending into the land, the house becoming a distant shape swallowed by the horizon. She watched it through the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely, and when it did, a strange pull tugged at her chest. Leaving the ranch had never felt like this before. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the road ahead, but the feeling lingered. The landscape changed as they traveled. The open fields of the ranch gave way to patches of wild shrubs and clusters of twisted trees that leaned together like they were whispering secrets. The morning light grew brighter, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. The wind picked up, pushing strands of her hair across her face. She tucked them behind her ear, noticing how the sunlight flickered across the dusty dashboard. He kept his eyes on the road, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the window. She could tell he was thinking about something, not the road, not the weather, but something heavier, something connected to that promise. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded once, not taking his eyes off the horizon. "Just making sure we get there in one piece." She studied him for a moment. That wasn't the whole truth. She knew it. He knew it. But she didn't push him. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, letting the hum of the truck fill the silence between them. A few miles later, they passed the old creek that cut across the land like a thin ribbon of silver. The water was low this season, exposing smooth stones and broken branches. She remembered the first time she saw it, how surprised she had been to find something so peaceful in such a rugged place. Back then, she was a stranger on the ranch, unsure if she could ever feel grounded on land so vast. Now the sight of the creek felt strangely familiar, almost comforting. "Road's a bit rougher than usual," he muttered, steering around a deep rut. "Looks like it," she replied, her voice lightening just enough to break the tension. He glanced at her then just briefly. "You don't get carsick, do you? Not anymore." "Anymore?" He raised a brow. She smiled faintly. "Long story." He didn't pry, he never did. But that small smile softened the tightness in his shoulders, and the atmosphere inside the truck loosened just a little. As they continued, the land slowly shifted from open country to signs of civilization. An abandoned shack appeared on their left, leaning at a dangerous angle as if one more strong wind would knock it over. Rusted fences lined the roadside, broken in places, swallowed by weeds in others. She watched these markers pass by, each one bringing her closer to town, and closer to whatever she was afraid to face. The rancher noticed the way her hands tightened in her lap. If you need a minute before we get there, just say so." She shook her head gently. "I'll be all right. You don't have to pretend." "I'm not pretending," she whispered, though part of her knew she was. The town was still miles away, but the weight of it already pressed against her thoughts. The people, the noise, the memories, the choices. She didn't know what she would find there, answers, trouble, or something she thought she'd left behind. And under all of that, beneath every worry she tried to swallow, the promise she'd made earlier pulsed like a heartbeat. "Come back home." She kept replaying his voice in her mind, the way he had said those words, not as a demand, but as a hope, maybe even a fear. It was strange how 4 simple words could feel like a thread tying her to something she wasn't sure she deserved. The miles slipped away and the road grew smoother. Faint outlines of buildings appeared in the distance, rising slowly like ghosts from the morning haze. Town was close now, closer than she felt ready for. But the rancher didn't speed up or slow down. He kept the same steady pace, as if he knew that rushing would only make her feel trapped. And as they drew nearer to the place she had been avoiding for so long, she realized something she hadn't expected. She wasn't afraid of town. She was afraid of what town might change. Afraid that once she stepped into that world again, she might lose the fragile sense of home she had found on the ranch. Afraid that her promise might be harder to keep than she thought. And yet, despite that fear, she pressed her hand against the window, watching the town grow clearer with every passing second. Whatever waited for her, she would face it. But she felt the weight of the rancher's trust sitting quietly beside her, steady as the road ahead. The first thing she noticed about town was the noise. After weeks, or was it months? On the ranch, the constant buzz felt almost unreal. Wagons rolling, engines humming, doors slamming, voices rising and falling in uneven waves. Shops lining the main street were already opening, their signs swinging gently in the morning wind. The smell of fresh bread mixed with dust and fuel. Children ran across the sidewalks, and dogs barked at anything that moved. It was a world so different from the ranch that it almost felt like stepping into another life. The rancher pulled the truck to a stop near the general store. The moment the engine shut off, she felt the weight of everything she'd come here for land squarely on her shoulders. He turned toward her, giving her a small, steady nod, his quiet way of saying she could take her time. She opened her door, stepped onto the street, and felt the ground shift beneath her. Not physically, emotionally. Town used to be familiar. Once upon a time, she'd known every corner, every face. But now, after finding peace on the ranch, the place felt overwhelming. She walked a few steps ahead while he unloaded a couple of crates from the back. She didn't look back at him, but she could feel his presence. Strong, steady, unrushed. It gave her courage, even if she didn't say it out loud. Inside the store, the scent of old wood and packed shelves greeted her. A few people glanced her way, some with curiosity, some with recognition she wasn't ready to confront. She kept her head down as she picked up the supplies she needed, simple things like soaps, bandages, dried goods. Yet even these simple errands felt heavier than they should have. At the counter, the old shopkeeper narrowed his eyes. "Haven't seen you in a good while," he said, his tone somewhere between friendly and cautious. "Been busy," she replied softly. He didn't push, but the look he gave her said he remembered things she didn't want to revisit. She paid quickly and left, breathing easier once she stepped outside again. Meanwhile, the rancher waited by the truck, leaning against the tailgate. He didn't ask how it went. He just offered his usual calm presence, which was more comforting than any words could be. She placed the bags beside him and gave a small nod toward the rest of the town. "There's someone I need to see," she said. He hesitated, not out of resistance but out of concern. "You want me to come with you?" She shook her head. "No, this part I need to handle it alone." He studied her for a long moment, reading the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her jaw. But he respected her space the way he always did. "I'll be right here," he said simply. And somehow those 4 words made it easier for her to walk away. She moved through the town's winding streets, past buildings that carried echoes of her past. She avoided familiar faces and turned down quieter alleys. Her steps quickened as she approached a small office tucked between a tailor shop and a bakery. The faded sign on the door made her chest tighten. Asterisk Henderson and Co. Legal Services. She swallowed hard and pushed the door open. The bell above it rang sharply, cutting through the stillness inside. Behind a cluttered desk sat Mr. Henderson, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked up from his paperwork, surprised but not confused. "Well," he said, leaning back, "I wondered when you'd come." She took a deep breath and moved closer, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm here to finish everything. Whatever paperwork is left, whatever I need to sign, I'm ready." He nodded slowly, studying her face. "I'm glad you're taking this step, but you understand what comes with it, don't you?" "I do. You're letting go of what you left behind." She hesitated, feeling the truth of those words settle deep inside her. "It's time." He gathered a stack of documents and handed them to her. She scanned each page, her heart pounding as she realized just how final this was. A door to her old life closing forever. A weight she had carried for too long finally ready to be set down. Her hand shook as she signed the last paper. Mr. Henderson offered a gentle smile. "You've been running from this for a long time." "I know, but you didn't run forever." "That matters," she nodded, unable to speak. She turned toward the door, but before she reached it, he called after her. "You're going back to that ranch, aren't you?" She froze. "Yes," she said quietly. "Good. I think you've found where you belong." She didn't answer. She simply stepped outside, blinking hard as sunlight washed over her. Her chest felt tight, but also lighter than it had in years. The weight of unfinished business no longer dragged behind her like a heavy chain. But town wasn't done with her. As she walked back toward the truck, a familiar voice cut through the noise of the street. "You're back." She stiffened instantly, turning to see someone she once knew too well. A figure from her past. Someone she had left behind for a reason. Her breath caught, and suddenly she felt small again, like the version of herself she had worked so hard to leave behind. "I'm not staying," she said firmly. They stepped closer. "We need to talk." "No," she replied, stepping back. "We don't." Their face hardened. "You can't just walk away." She steadied her voice. "I already did." And then she turned and walked away without looking back, her heart racing but her spirit steadier than ever. She spotted the truck in the distance, solid, unmoving, waiting just like he promised. The rancher stood beside it, arms crossed loosely, eyes scanning the street until they found her. Concern flickered across his face as he watched her approach, noticing the tension in her posture. She didn't have to explain. Not yet. But as she reached him, she felt something anchor inside her. Town was loud, chaotic, full of ghosts. But the truck, the man waiting beside it, felt like stability. And without meaning to, she felt herself breathe a little easier just standing there. She stopped a few steps from the truck, her breathing still uneven from the encounter she'd tried so hard to avoid. The rancher didn't move toward her right away. He just watched her with those steady eyes of his, the kind that didn't demand answers but somehow made her feel seen. Really seen. And for a moment she just stood there, letting the noise of town fade into the background while she tried to gather herself. "You all right?" he asked finally, his voice low, careful. She nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I am now." He didn't press for details. He didn't ask who she saw or why her hands were still trembling slightly. Instead, he opened the truck door for her, holding it with a quiet patience that felt more comforting than any words could be. She climbed inside and sat there for a moment, gripping the edge of the seat just to ground herself. When he shut the door and walked around to his side, the loudness of town seemed to fall away little by little. The engine rumbled to life again, and as they pulled away from the storefronts, she watched the buildings shrink in the side mirror. The person she used to be, the one who lived here, the one who feared confrontation, the one who carried unfinished business like a shadow, stayed behind with every mile. She didn't miss her, not even a little. The rancher said nothing, but she could feel him keeping a close eye on her without looking directly. He noticed how her breathing slowed, how her shoulders eased down inch by inch, how she kept glancing back at town as if making sure it wasn't following her. When she finally let out a long exhale, he nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. "You handled it," he said quietly. She turned her head toward him. "You don't even know what happened. Don't need to. You walked back here on your own, didn't you?" Something in the way he said it, the quiet certainty, the simple faith, made her throat tighten again. She looked ahead, letting the wind blow through the half-open window and lift the hair from her face. The road stretched wide before them, the edges glowing faintly in the early afternoon light. For a while, they drove in silence, the kind of silence that didn't feel heavy anymore, the kind that felt shared. She traced a finger along the worn stitching of the seat beneath her. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For waiting." He kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the window in that relaxed posture she'd come to recognize. "A promise is a promise," he said. "You said you'd come back, I believed you." She wasn't used to that, being believed so easily. Trust had always been a complicated thing in her life. Fragile, temporary, often misplaced. But here with him, trust felt steady, like the land itself. And the realization settled deep, touching something inside her she hadn't let anyone near in a long time. The further they drove from town, the lighter she felt. The tangled emotions she carried into that office, the tension from running into her past, the fear of old patterns catching up to her. They loosened like knots being undone one by one. "You okay with leaving everything behind?" he asked after a few miles. She looked out at the fields stretching endlessly under the sky. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I finally am." He didn't smile, not fully. But the corners of his mouth softened, and his shoulders eased, like he'd been carrying part of her worry without telling her. They passed the creek again, the one that marked the halfway point between town and home. The sunlight danced across its surface, and the familiar sight brought a quiet calm over her. It felt like a reminder that she was heading back to something safe, something she chose. The ranch came into view long before they reached it, a small silhouette rising from the open land, framed by fencing and grazing horses. She didn't realize she was smiling until she caught her reflection in the window. It wasn't a big smile, just a soft one, but it was real. As they pulled closer, she felt her heartbeat steady, falling into rhythm with the rattling of the truck and the soft hum of the engine. He glanced at her again. "Feels different coming back, doesn't it?" She nodded slowly. "It does." "What changed?" She hesitated, fingers tightening slightly in her lap. "Me." He didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. The answer was written clearly in the way she looked at the ranch now, not as a temporary shelter, not as a place to hide, but as something she was choosing with her whole heart. The truck rolled to a stop in front of the porch. He shut off the engine, and the sudden quiet felt warm, not empty. She stepped out of the truck, her boots meeting the familiar ground with a soft thud. The air smelled like hay and open fields and sunlight warming old wood. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it fill her lungs. When she opened them, the rancher was watching her again. Not cautiously this time, but with something gentler, something like relief. "You kept your promise," he said. She walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. "I meant it." His jaw tightened slightly, not from tension, but from an emotion he didn't quite know how to express. He nodded once, slow and thoughtful. "I'm glad you came back." She held his gaze, feeling the truth of her own words forming quietly. "I didn't just come back because I promised." She hesitated, her voice softening. "I came back because this is where I want to be." The wind moved around them, lifting dust from the path and carrying it across the yard. Horses stirred in the distance, and a bird landed on the fence, chirping like it knew a shift had taken place. She stepped up onto the porch, her hand brushing against the rail. He remained at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her like he was seeing something new, something he hadn't expected but had hoped for. She turned back toward him, and the quiet between them felt different now. Warmer, safer. Town had taken pieces of her she no longer needed. The ranch, this land, this peace, and this man had given her something far more valuable in return.